Hi, it's Kimberly. I'm the founder and editor for Harriet, and I'm joined by Tonya Ladipo. She is a counselor and therapist, and today we're going to be continuing our series on Black women and mental health, and we're going to have a discussion about anxiety. So thank you for joining us again, Tonya. I really appreciate it.
Glad to be here again.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about anxiety because I think it's something that a lot of people deal with, but they might not know how to name.
Yes.
And so I would love for your professional thoughts on how we can recognize it and also how we can manage it. So let's just start from the very beginning, right?
Sure.
So how would somebody know if they are dealing with anxiety?
That's a great question. So anxiety, I feel like, is stress on steroids. So when you're feeling really overwhelmed, when you're having trouble concentrating, when you can't focus, when you're easily distracted, and when your stress level is really interfering with your daily life, that's when it kind of crosses over from what we typically carry as stress into something that's anxiety. So those constantly racing thoughts in your mind about your to-do list or the worry that you have that keeps you up at night, makes it hard for you to focus on conversations with people. That's a good definition of what anxiety looks like in our world.
And I know that when I visited a therapist, she pointed out anxiety and things that I didn't even recognize. So she was telling me that avoiding an issue, really simple task was another manifestation. Could you give some more insight into that?
Yeah, so procrastination, I want to say two things. Procrastination and constant lateness, I think, are actually symptoms of anxiety. When you're delaying doing something because you're nervous about it, you don't know that you can do it, you get scared, and so you keep putting it off, putting it off, putting it off. I think procrastination sometimes is a symptom of anxiety. And then lateness is the same thing. Some people who are chronically late, sometimes I think it really is a form of anxiety. Sometimes it's social anxiety if you're late to meeting friends or late to an appointment with another person, and the dread that you might experience of having to have a conversation or have that particular conversation. And so you keep putting it off and putting it off, and then you end up being 15 minutes late, 20 minutes late. So yes, right. I think your therapist's point of, what you're avoiding sometimes manifests itself through anxiety.
Yeah, I had depression and anxiety, and I remember even like checking email.
Yes.
Became a source of lots of fear and dread for me. Yes. Because I knew that I was falling behind on things. Yep. Right. Yes. And so I knew that they were emailing me about those things. And so it really, I would go weeks without checking email. So something really, really simple.
Right. And then it snowballs, right, Kimberly? Right. So if you go weeks without doing it, if you're putting something off, then what happens is it builds and builds, and then what was a small thing then becomes a really huge thing, right? Because you put it off, and then it's harder to deal with, and it's even scarier to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. So just diving right in was one of the ways, and so I know from my experience, my anxiety was coupled with depression.
Sure.
Do you see that a lot?
Yes, the two are often related. The constant worry, the racing of thoughts is often connected to feeling depressed and feeling low and feeling blue and having difficulty getting out of bed. When we're talking about the things we were with procrastinating and running late, that doesn't feel good to our bodies, and it doesn't feel good in our relationships. And so then you start to not feel so good about yourself, right. And it really affects your self-esteem, which is a significant piece of depression. So they're often connected. And something that I think is really interesting, this interesting statistic, is that women are twice as likely to experience anxiety as men, and they're also twice as likely to experience depression, two more times than men. Women experience depression. And so that, the way that I think women really experience it and the fact that they're often connected is very true for us.
So do you have any thoughts about why women might be experiencing anxiety and depression at such high rates?
Well, and I think it goes to what we were talking about last month with the Superwoman myth and the idea that we're supposed to be everything to everyone at every time. And that's frankly unrealistic. That's a perfect woman, and there is no perfect woman. And so the pressure, I think, to live up to that and do that causes us to have anxious feelings. It causes us to worry that we're not good enough, that we're missing deadlines, that we're missing important meetings or conversations with people who we care about. And so it's the constant worry about everything we have going on in our lives that we're not necessarily doing it all because we can't. And so I think when we have those unrealistic expectations, it's going to naturally lead to a state of anxiety.
Right. So, I mean, if we're talking about anxiety, procrastination, being constantly late, having these constant interfering thoughts,
Yes.
what type of impacts can that have on how you navigate your daily life?
It really kind of affects all pieces of it. So it affects your work if you're showing up late, if you're missing deadlines, if you're not doing a great job that you might be capable of doing, but because you're so worried about getting it perfect, you don't do it very well or you don't do it at all. So that really can impact work. But another way that impacts, I think, our lives is our relationships. So if you're constantly worrying, if you're constantly thinking about what you need to do or what you should do better or what you did wrong, you're not present. You're not having the conversation with the person in front of you. So if you're sitting at home having a conversation with your partner and all you're thinking about is everything that you're worried about, then you're not really engaged in that conversation. Right? And people in our lives, they know us. They know when we're listening. They know when we're not listening. They know when we're distracted. They know when we're not focusing on them, right? Those are all symptoms of anxiety. And so that can be really frustrating and angering, right, for the people we care about, whether it's sisters or partners or children or friends, when they want your attention and you're not able to give it to them because you're really worrying in your own mind.
I remember there was a big thing about like social anxiety disorder, I feel like a couple of years ago. I remember reading a couple of articles about that. Could you offer some more insight into what exactly that is? And
Sure. Sometimes people misconfuse or confuse social anxiety disorder with shyness. And so shyness is just a natural state of being in the world, where it might be challenging to make connections with people that you don't know. That's kind of general shyness that a lot of people experience. But what's different from shyness to social anxiety disorder is when it becomes social anxiety disorder is when it really impacts your life. When you will not go to the party because you're too scared to talk to new people and you're too consumed with what they're going to think about you. Somebody who's shy might be hesitant to go to the party. They might be nervous to go to the party, but they might still go. Somebody with social anxiety disorder will avoid social situations. It will really impact and impair their kind of way they navigate through the world, because they're avoiding situations because they're so gripped with anxiety about being in social settings. And so that could be having conversations with new people. It could just be being in public with a lot of people you don't know, going to the grocery store, or going to, an intimate setting like a party. So those are the two differences.
Okay. I think that articulating the differences there is really important.
Yes.
Because there, like we mentioned last week, there's a lot of victim blaming that happens around some of these issues, right? And I think because anxiety is one of those that we don't often name, I think it's really important for us to articulate that and explore it.
Yes.
So let's say that we now understand what anxiety is. And we have diagnosed ourselves with anxiety. What's the next step? How can we fix it?
So once you know what it is, and once you recognize that it's present in your life, there are a couple of things you can do. The first is to slow yourself down. So the constantly racing thoughts that are going through your mind, that you kind of take charge of them, that you acknowledge that they're there, as opposed to letting it be background music to your own life that you don't pay attention to. And so the background noise that's telling you you're not good enough, or telling you you're worrying about all these things, to really recognize it and to stop it. And so what I'm going to recommend works really well, but it might sound a little bit silly, is that you start talking to yourself. So when you have the idea of everything that you're worrying about, that you recognize it and you tell yourself stop. And so what I'll do is I'll say, stop it, Tonya. Like, just stop worrying about it. And so really verbalizing it and saying it out loud helps interrupt the process. And then I can do something different. So first you want to recognize it. You want to tell yourself to stop. And then you want to distract yourself. So I can distract myself with something that is pleasurable, whether it's a fantasy and I'm thinking about what vacation I want to take, and I really will give myself a lot of detail about what that vacation is going to look like and where I'm going to go and who I'm going to be with, to distract myself from the worry. So distraction is a great tool to be able to use. And then I also like to say to go outside and just to have a change of scenery and just reorient yourself from whatever environment you're in, but to put yourself in a different environment can really help interrupt that process.
Yeah. So, self-talk, I know it does sound a little silly, but I can say, as somebody who suffers from anxiety,
Yes.
I've been talking to myself all day.
Yes, and I support that, Kimberly.
Like, Kimberly, like, what are you really afraid of? Like, Kimberly, you're being ridiculous right now. Like, so yes, it absolutely has really changed my life and how I approach things that are scary to me, right? Like things that are irrational, right? Like rational and, things that other people would think to be irrational, which I do have some of those anxieties. So, okay.
And one more piece I just want to put in there, Kimberly, that I think is useful. Sometimes the anxiety is so powerful, it almost feels like it's taking over our bodies. Right. And so the distraction and the talking to yourself might start to impact it, but it doesn't do it enough. And so I really believe sometimes you need to do something physical. And so it might be as simple as 2 push-ups, 3 push-ups, but to really kind of get the energy out of your body. It might be taking a quick walk around the block in a brisk fashion, or my favorite one, because you can do this regardless of the weather, is to put on a really upbeat dance song and truly dance like nobody's watching, right? Because you really can get the energy of the anxiety out of your body. And that 3 minutes of dancing, you will come back and feel very, very different and a lot calmer.
Is counseling a good treatment?
Of course, and obviously I'm biased, but yes. So the benefit of that is that you doing it on a systemic way, so you're doing it on a regular basis. You've got somebody that's checking in with you to hold you accountable, and then really giving you some concrete tools to do on a regular basis. So some of the things that I was telling people to do, some people are going to listen to it, go home, do it, it's going to work really well. Other people are going to struggle with implementing it, and they'll say, this is a great idea, but for some reason I'm not doing it. And so therapy is going to really help you figure out, well, what's getting in the way of you doing it, and what do we need to do, what we need to alter to make it a part of whenever you feel anxious that you're actually doing it. So yes, therapy is a great tool to use.
Yeah. So I really believe in being my sister's keeper. I think that I have benefited greatly from people in my community seeing that I was struggling and trying to help me. So I'm wondering if we recognize the symptoms of anxiety in somebody else to help them out.
Definitely. And what you could do is just be honest. When talking about girlfriends, I think it's important that we're talking about coming to somebody with love, and coming and saying, I see that you are really worried all the time and you don't seem to be okay. I'm worried about you. What can we do? So coming in a really loving fashion. And I think it also depends on your relationship. I have a friend who, when I can't talk to myself, Kimberly, to stop my thoughts, I have my friend who will do it. I'll call her and I'll tell her everything that's racing in my mind. And she'll say, Tonya, stop it. You know better. And I'll say, thank you. I kind of needed that. I needed you to shake me a little bit to kind of get back to right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and
that's what friends should be doing for each other.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I think, a part of being a good friend is being knowledgeable. So trying to arm yourself with knowledge. I think that's part of what we're trying to do here. But also, there is a lot of, because there's a lack of knowledge, there's a lot of victim blaming that happens. Mm-hmm. And so, how can we, as people who are now armed with knowledge about what anxiety is, about what depression is and what it looks like, how can we combat that victim blaming?
Well, I think when you have some understanding, it's easier to have compassion. You know, it's hard to have compassion for something or someone who you don't understand. And so while some people might not have experienced anxiety that is gripping, we've all had moments in our lives where we really worry about someone or something, right? And so if you can kind of extrapolate that and magnify that and think about that on a really large level. Imagine a time in your life where you were really worried about something and extend it to all aspects of your life. That's what somebody who's dealing with anxiety has constantly. And so I think if we can kind of have that piece of understanding that we can have compassion. And then what goes with compassion is what you were talking about earlier, is how can we be supportive, right? You don't want to just watch somebody suffer. You don't want to blame them, but you also want to help them kind of move through it as well.
Okay. So, if there are any questions, I definitely want to open it up. And if anybody has any more questions, did you have any more lingering thoughts about anxiety and how we can manage the stress in our lives?
Yeah, so one thing I wanted to mention that I think is important is to have realistic expectations. I think if you can kind of interject it with the idea that you have to be perfect, it would help minimize the anxiety that people feel. And so one thing that we talk about at the Ladipo group is KISS, which just stands for keep it simple. So when you start your day in the morning, you have a list of 20 things you want to do, to go back through and whittle it down to what are the 3 or 4 that are really important. So how can you kind of go through your day or go through the hour, or go through the moment and figure out what you need to really pay attention to now? And I think doing that will really help it reduce some anxiety.
Yeah. So I can absolutely, you're saying, when I was just crawling out of the depths of my depression and just beginning to deal with my anxiety, what really was helpful for me was taking it one step at a time,
Yes.
beginning with small tasks and working my way up to living a normal, happy, healthy life. So,
Yes.
yeah, so that is, I don't see any questions.
Okay.
I think that was really, really interesting and informative. So thank you so much again, Tonya, for lending your knowledge.
Thanks for having me. It's always a good conversation.
Yeah, I'm absolutely sure that we're going to help somebody. So that is going to be it. So join us again. This is going to be a regular series on For Harriet and helping Black women maintain and manage our mental and emotional well-being. The next topic will be announced shortly. So thank you guys and have a great night.
Thank you. Have a good night.